Welcome to our episode on swimming and splashing. Man, and in fact all mammals, have a long and tangled evolutionary history with water. And it should really come as no surprise that water has profound psychological and physiological effects on us. And if we use it to our advantage, it can help calm us and help us to behave better. So today we're going to learn how to use swimming and splashing to lower our stress response, lower our fight-flight response, and increase our vagal tone or the vagal brake to the heart, which then gives a signal to the brain and to the entire body that we're safe and things are okay. So I have to clarify a couple things first. Often when I recommend people swimming to people, they say it's difficult to get them to swim. So what I'm really talking about is not swimming laps, but water immersion, just getting in the water. So swimming, moving, playing is all great, but getting in the water is enough to trigger this response. And when I talk about splashing, I'm really talking about immersion of your nose in water. And I'll give you a demonstration. Since we don't carry pools with us everywhere, sometimes it's easier to get into a sink, or we almost always have access to that. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about how I came to study this and experience some of this. And it really started when I graduated from college and I was working on a concrete crew. The weather changed and we weren't pouring concrete for the winter, so I was looking for a job. And my wife found a job in a children's home living with 12 adjudicated delinquents, all boys, all teenagers. And we were to be, and what they were looking for was something we used to call house parents, which I don't think people use that term anymore. We were just slightly older than these kids. We were just around 20 or 21. And we didn't have any experience. So I said to my wife, I can't imagine we'll get hired into this job. And so we went and got interviewed and immediately were hired. And not because we did such a great interview, but because no one else applied for the job. And the people who had been doing the job had only lasted one weekend, so they needed somebody as quick as possible. So we jumped in, and again, weren't really sure about what we were doing or how to do it, but they had an incentive program at the institution, and it actually was an incentive program for a few of the kids, but for most of the kids, it was a disincentive program. So for those kids who did really well, which was a couple, they got privileges and they got good levels on the incentive program, and it set all their privileges like bedtime and off-campus time and things like that. But most of the kids reacted pretty poorly when they got their levels, and often caused a meltdown when people got assigned whatever their incentive level was. But it also was troubling when you tried to reinforce some of the things they had earned, so to speak. So for example, if you have a 16-year-old and his bedtime is set at 7 p.m., that could cause a meltdown just trying to get him into the room. So again, it seemed like it caused more problems than it resolved. Anyway, one of the things that was difficult was Sundays. And I think that was because generally it's a long weekend, but people are getting ready and geared up to go back to school the following day, and that can be challenging. So, and when you have 12 boys together, all teenagers, all who have been in some kind of trouble or another, you can expect there's a significant amount of trouble most of the time. Anyway, so what we started to do on Sundays was the children's home had a gym and they had a pool. And so I started taking the kids on Sundays. I'd reserve the pool and I'd take them down and we'd do all kinds of swimming contests so that everybody earned something, got some kind of reward. And then we do a barbecue. And Sunday night turned into one of the most peaceful nights of the week. Because I assumed at the time it was because people were tired and had moved around quite a bit. And I'm sure that's part of it, but there's some other stuff that I later learned changed in their bodies that helped them to feel calm. So, discovered early on that this was a valuable intervention for some people. And for most of the 40 years I've been doing this work, I have recommended, particularly people who are hyper-aroused or really activated, that they get in water on a regular basis. The second example I want to give you is, so in that case, we're using water proactively, right? We're using it in advance of any kind of problem to be preventative so that we don't see the kind of behaviors that we don't want to see. The second example is my son Michael, who came to live with us when he was about 12 or 13. Michael has autism, but he also had some significant trauma in his life and was highly dysregulated, and fight-flight response got turned on real quick and could get quite aggressive and very quickly. So the first year we were together, we swam every day. And not only did we swim every day, but we swam Christmas and Thanksgiving, and people said to me, don't you think that's a bit much? And I said, no, Christmas and Thanksgiving are the days he needs it the most, because those are the days that, we can't predict what will happen. There's lots of excitement, lots of change, lots of people around. So really we use swimming not only to reset his idol, but to reset mine. So together we'd have a better day if we both started our day by being nice and calm. And the third example is of splashing, and in more of a acute sense. So I was on vacation actually, and this kid called me, and she was having intrusive thoughts. And her intrusive thoughts were about this episode that happened quite a while ago when she was a young teenager. And it's pretty horrific what happened to her. And intrusive thoughts come in, and you can't get rid of them. But they also change the state of your body back to what it was like when the event occurred. So we talk on the phone a little bit, and she says, I really need to come and see you. And I said, well, I'm 400 miles away, so that's going to be a little difficult. And typically what we'd do is she'd come see me, and we'd do some tapping, and that would help her out. Anyway, that wasn't possible that night. And so I said, let's do something to get your body settled down again and maybe help the intrusive thoughts go away. So I always start with a body scan. So I say, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really upset, 1 being really calm, where are you? She says 9 or 10. I said, okay, let's head to the bathroom with the speakerphone, put it on the sink, get some water going, body temperature or cooler, not hot, not real cold, and I want you to do some splashing. And again, it's a thing that we had done multiple times together. And it's a matter of getting water into your hands, getting your nose in the water 5 or 6 seconds, 5 or 6 times, and then we go back to the body scan. So we go back to the body scan, and I say, well, how do you feel now? On a scale of 1 to 10. She says, well, I'm a 1 or a 2. So, well, what are you going to do? She said, well, I think I'll go have dinner. I'm hungry. So quite a fantastic change, all in just a couple of minutes. So those are some of my examples. Let me give you a demonstration of the splashing. We'll do that right now. Okay, so here we are for our demonstration of splashing. So the first thing we're going to do is get the water running and get it at a comfortable temperature, a little bit on the cool side, but still comfortable. And for those of us with glasses, we'll take them off, we'll roll up the sleeves a little bit. And there's only 2 things to remember, and they're 2 numbers, 5 and 6. So we're going to do this for about 5 or 6 seconds, about 5 or 6 times. And what we want to do is get the water in our hands and get our nose in the water. So I'll count to myself, and that's 1, and that's 2, and that's 3, and that's 4, and 5, and one last one, and that's it. Now what I'll do is, in a moment, go over some of the research with you and tell you why that's causes such a powerful response in our body. Okay. So now let me tell you about some of the research, some of my favorite research on splashing and swimming, or water immersion and facial immersion. And if you're interested in the bibliography, all the research citations, you'll see some of them in the presentation, but they'll all be listed on the website, which is tamingthetigervt.com. So back to the days of Cunningham Children's Home, I was always believed that the mechanism which caused people to get calm from swimming had to do with thermoregulation, had to do with deep body cooling. And I'm sure that plays some part in it. But then along came, just recently, a couple of books I read. One was called The Deep, and the other is One Breath, and they're books on diving. And they introduced me to something that I hadn't heard of before, which is called a mammalian diving reflex. And the mammalian diving reflex gives you the capacity to shunt your blood from your periphery into your core. And it lowers your heart rate and lowers your blood pressure. So it provides that sympathetic or parasympathetic break. It calms your body physiologically. And I'll go into some more research that actually explores some other hormonal effects as well. So the research began in the late 1890s with a guy named Charles Virchow. And you couldn't probably get away with this kind of research anymore. And so what he did was he strangled ducks. He cut off the oxygen supply to ducks. And he strangled some of them on land and some of them underwater. And you can see why that's probably not a repeatable experiment. Anyway, the ducks that he strangled on land, that he cut off the oxygen to their body, they lived an average of about 7 minutes. The ducks he strangled underwater lived an average of 23 minutes. So over 3 times as long. So clearly something had to be happening physiologically in the body for these large differences to occur. And so you would think of blood pressure and heart rate and things like that, but that really wasn't explored until much later, when the technology was available to measure those things. And so Per Scholander came along in about 1962 and did a series of experiments, which I think were interesting, and he had the technology to actually measure these things. So he put people in the water, he immersed them, head out of water, and what he found was there was a significant drop in heart rate, blood pressure, and this vasoconstriction. This peripheral, taking the peripheral blood and putting it in the core. And I think what that allows, of course, is that all of the energy and oxygen that's in that blood is just feeding your brain and your core, right? And so it allows for the maximum life of your brain and for the entire organism. So Scholander then goes on to put treadmills underwater and get people wired up and back on the treadmills to see if he can jack up your sympathetic system, to see if he can cause this fight-flight response to turn on, and you can't. So that was really interesting because what we're dealing with bad behavior often is just this sympathetic surge where people get overactivated and respond to things that are really just minor problems. So then the technology continues to improve. And in 2014, there's a study on the mammalian diving reflex, but it goes beyond just the basic heart rate, blood pressure, and vasoconstriction, that movement of the blood to the core of your body. And they got a significant reduction in heart rate and blood pressure. But something really interesting happened, which explains the bad behavior of many children, I think. You get a 107% increase in diuresis from being in the pool. That means you got to pee over twice as much. And that probably explains why often kids do pee in the pool. What's interesting about that is that the hormone that regulates how much you urinate is called vasopressin, or antidiuretic hormone. So As that decreases, you pee more. When it increases, it reabsorbs all the moisture out of your urine so that you pee very little. But it's also responsible for other things, for vigilance, for defensiveness, for mobilization, activation, and aggression. So when you bring your vasopressin down, you bring your capacity to get into these bad behaviors down simultaneously. And they also found that it affected a number of other hormones. And one of the interesting things about the study, again, based on my experiences, that I believed that cooler water was better. And in fact, that turns out not to be true. That pool temperatures in the 80s are just fine to trigger this response. And if you get it to really low temperatures, it kind of turns on your sympathetic system a little bit. So the best thing is a cool pool, or lake, or stream, or whatever. And then, to switch over to splashing for a moment. Jimmy Durante used to say, "Only the nose knows," and he was right about the nose knowing about the mammalian diving reflex. So what we found is, or what's been found is that when you immerse your nose in water, it quickly triggers this bradycardia, slowing down of the heart. Again, sends a signal to the brain, be calm, everything's okay. And you can look at the data I have up here, and it's interesting because you can see from the point at which they do the immersion, it's about 4 breaths. And then their heart rate goes to about half of what it was. So it's a very quick way to cure tachycardia, or a heart that's racing, which is one of the symptoms of people who have behavioral struggles. So I would say the thing to remember is that water immersion, facial immersion, swimming and splashing work very quickly to take away the physiological capacity to misbehave, right? And that it really can be used in 3 ways. The first way is preventative, is let me reset your idol by using it on a regular basis. And I often see people who say, I can go once a week or twice a week, and for me that's just not enough. You want to reset that as often as possible, and particularly with people who are really difficult, every day. The second way is that when you're anticipating an episode, somebody starts to escalate, that's a good time to get into the splashing, because that can avoid the episode entirely and help them calm down. And the third way is if they've had an episode, many people take a long time to recover from that episode. So if you put them in water after they've had an episode, again, turns on that vagal brake automatically, message to the brain, be calm, everything's okay. So I highly recommend that you splash and swim on.